Hello, and welcome to another live chapter reading of a Thrill of the Chase novel, Embracing Jared by Anna Paige, as presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Jared. To the caregiver in charge. While I realize you are relatively new to this position, I feel 2 months is sufficient time to learn what is and is not expected of you concerning my father's care. You were made well aware of the particular requirements regarding communication with me, as evidenced by the detailed non-disclosure agreement signed by you upon receiving that position. Twice now, you have failed to check in at the mandatory times. I'd advise you not to let it happen a third time if you'd care to retain your position. Given that my donations fund over 75% of the facility's operating costs, I can assure you my warning is not to be taken lightly. I expect stellar care from my father going forward, along with regular updates. This is non-negotiable. Regards, J. Shaw. Dear Mr. Shaw, first, my name is not caregiver. It is Madison. Please at least offer me that bit of respect when dressing me down. I feel that 2 months is sufficient time to have learned my name. Madison Cole. You may address me as Madison or Miss Cole, whichever you prefer. Further, I have sent communications according to your requested schedule, when possible. Believe it or not, Mr. Shaw, things here can get rather hectic, and on the 2 occasions you mentioned, there were medical emergencies with other patients, and I had to divide my time and attention to cover for the staff members who accompanied those patients to the ER. While I do apologize for having not met your expected deadlines, I'm frankly of the opinion that if you are that worried about the occasional late email, perhaps you should pick up the phone and call in for an update. While most people do not use them as such, those nifty handheld devices everyone is so proud of are actually telephones, and therefore are capable of making phone calls. Imagine it. You push a series of buttons, lift the device to your ear, and hear an actual human voice on the other end. Astonishing, isn't it? As for retaining my position, I have no doubt that you could have me fired with little more energy than one expends on a sneeze, but I don't react well to threats. Do what you must. If it serves you better to deprive your father of someone he's been accustomed to and actually started to bond with simply because of a missed email or two, by all means, do so. My multiple degrees and stellar work record will follow me to the next facility. The rantings of one ill-tempered celebrity will not diminish my value in any way. I will, of course, miss your father, but as you've so clearly asserted, you're the boss. A busy, arrogant, unforgiving boss whom I have yet to see step foot in this facility. There are numerous other things I'd like to point out about your level of hypocrisy, but I am due back to check on your father and read to him before bedtime. Besides, I'm sure you have to get back to focusing on being a rock god. I'll tell him you said hello. In case you're interested, I'll be reading If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. He seems to respond the most to that one. You would have known that already if you ever bothered to visit. Good day. Madison Cole, a.k.a. Caregiver. Chapter 2, Jared. Dude, are you on that phone again? Ethan looked over me and shook his head. You're worse than Len after he discovered Tumblr. You've got to stop stressing that shit. Either let it go or have her tossed. I'm definitely leaning towards having her canned. I just wish I could be there in person to do it. I frowned at my inbox, not bothering to look at him as I spoke. You know better than anyone how off base she is, right? I didn't try to hide my stutter around Ethan. It was a waste of energy. He was the one I let that guard down around, though aside from my father. My father, whose nurse couldn't follow simple fucking instructions. And now she was mouthing off to me? To me? She must have lost her fucking mind. Things are bound to get crazy there with all those patients. She was probably having one of those nights when she got your email, so she took her shit out on you. We've all been there, lashing out at the wrong person. Cut her some slack, bro. Ethan and I were hanging out in the lounge down the hall from the recording booths. He pulled his shirt up and looked in the mirror behind the couch, wincing as he pressed down the edges of the tape that wound around his torso. He was still healing after getting nailed by a cab in New York a few months back. The shit should have healed by now, but he keeps pushing himself to play, and the doc said it was putting stress on the healing bones. Stubborn fucker didn't listen, though. Need me to help you to rewrap those? He shook his head. Nah, the end just snagged on my shirt. It can wait until we get to Kane's place later. No point wasting tape when I'm about to be sweating my balls off behind my drum kit. Kane was Thrill of the Chase's lead guitarist, who'd bought an insanely large estate here in LA right after we cut our second album. Now, whenever we were in the studio, the whole gang crashed at Kane's, even Ethan, who had a place of his own just outside the city. We did some of our best writing between studio sessions, so it was beneficial to the process for us to stick close while we were cutting a new album. Over half our albums were written while recording the previous album, and those albums were written while recording the previous album, and around we went. This album was our last contracted one, but that didn't stop us from writing new stuff, even if we weren't sure when or if we'd ever actually lay down the tracks. Cade and Lennox strode into the lounge, looking tired. Cade, the band's lead singer, and Kane's twin brother, went right to the kitchenette on the far wall and grabbed himself a lemon water. His shoulder-length blonde hair was stuck to his sweaty face, and I wondered again why the hell the studio couldn't find a way to better cool the sound booths without ruining the acoustics. It was hot as fuck in there. How Ethan managed to lay down the drum tracks without having a heat stroke, I'd never know. Maybe it was just the studio. We'd only ever recorded here, so I had no clue if it was an across-the-board kind of issue or just this place. Since this was our last album with our current record label, it really wasn't worth fighting for changes now. Lennox, our smart-ass bassist, flopped down on the couch across from where I was sitting and bumped the back of Ethan's leg with his foot. Dude, put your shirt down. No one here is interested in seeing man titty. Blow me, Len. Ethan dropped his shirt and shot him a bird. Len tried to sweep Ethan's leg, but E was too fast for him, dodging at the last second and cracking up when Lennox kicked the corner of the steel and glass coffee table and let out a yelp of pain. Serves you right, I told Len, carefully visualizing each word as I spoke to stifle my stutter. It wasn't that difficult to speak smoothly, but it came at a price. I could only talk clearly when I took the time to see each word in my head before I said it, which made my speech slow most of the time. When we performed on stage, I did fine because I'd memorized how every lyric looked on paper, plus years of practicing the same lines. The words ran through my head like a ticker as I played. It also helped that I went over and over the printed lyrics before each concert. Because of that, and the ticker in my mind, I hadn't missed a single word in all these years. Or a single chord, but that was a whole nother thing. Conversation was challenging, mostly because I had to use the words in my head in such a rapid-fire way in order to keep up. It was doable, but draining. Add to that the distinctly shitty feeling that hit me every time I saw the frustration or irritation on someone's face because I was speaking too slowly. And most of the time, I ended up as conversational roadkill. So I just said fuck it after a while and didn't contribute much. Because of that, people thought I was shy. My slow speech, when I did choose to talk during interviews, also got me labeled as laid back, which was a better explanation than the truth. And I really was laid back most of the time, except when it came to my dad. Lennox eyed my phone. You sexting some chick or what? That phone has been in your hand all damn day. He assumed everything anyone ever did was in the pursuit of an orgasm. No, I focused on my wording, reminding myself to enunciate, dealing with incompetence and petulance from Dad's nurse. He didn't even bat an eye. He was used to me stressing over my dad's care. Oh, that explains it. Though I still suggest some sexting. Takes your mind off shit. I even have a few numbers if you're interested. Had to get creative after they took away my Tumblr porn. I can start you off with someone relatively tame until you get the hang of it. I ignored him, glaring at my inbox again. Leave him the fuck alone, Len. Cade came over and slapped Lennox on the back of the head, making Len's platinum spikes vibrate like tuning forks. He's not interested in your sloppy seconds. Unlike you, he could formulate a thought from above the waist. Jeez, everybody in this motherfucker needs to get laid. Bunch of grouchy bitches. Len stood and spun in a circle, both middle fingers high in the air, before waltzing out of the room, announcing, "I'm gonna find Kane. At least he hasn't bitten my head off yet today." "Give him time," Cade called out, chuckling. Ethan shook his head and looked over at me. "You going to respond or continue stewing about it?" "I'll decide on a course of action after today's sessions." I considered a moment, collecting my thoughts and cueing them in my mental ticker before speaking. The guys were used to my pauses between thoughts, but I still tried to do it as quickly as possible so I didn't drag down the tempo of the conversation and cause them to lose interest. The whole thing pisses me off, but it'll keep until tonight. If she misses tonight's check-in, even by 5 minutes, I'm having her tossed out on her snarky ass. If I was half hoping she would defy me so that I can get rid of her and stop stressing, but that would require at least a couple of phone calls, and I reserved direct calls for last resort situations when all other avenues were exhausted. Mostly because the front desk was staffed with people who had no idea what they were doing, and it frustrated me to try and converse with them. They didn't know who I was, so that made it more difficult to convince them that they could divulge information to me over the phone. And in the stutter, and it was like pulling teeth to get anything, or add in the stutter, and it was like pulling teeth to get anything accomplished. When Dad went to stay there, all the arrangements were made with the director, who doubled as chief of staff. Dad's name was changed in the files to protect his privacy, and we put several other safeguards in place to keep the press from discovering his presence. I'd appreciated that they made me jump through hoops when I called, but it also frustrated me when I needed info quickly and had to wade through 20 minutes of bullshit to get answers. Which was why I'd had a chat with the director a couple of years back and requested daily updates from the caregivers. Just a quick email to say all was well. Not too much to ask for, since I was practically funding the entire place with my donations. Then, late last year, just before Thanksgiving, there had been an issue with a staff member stealing from one of the other residents, and a lot of attention was suddenly focused on the facility. The news had done a story on it, and I panicked, thinking someone would leak Dad's or my name to the press, and I'd have to uproot him to protect his privacy. Thankfully, that didn't happen, but it was a tense few weeks while everything settled down. Now, thanks to staffing changes, Dad had a new caregiver, and she wasn't living up to my expectations. If things didn't improve, and fast, there would be another staffing change, and her slack ass would be looking for new employment. I wouldn't tolerate anything less than stellar care for my father. He was the only real family I had left. Kane popped his head into the doorway. "Hey, E, you're up." Ethan stood and made his way toward the door, running a hand over his dark, messy curls and blowing out a breath like he always did when he was gearing up to play. When he passed me, he put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "You good, bro?" "Good and pissed, but I'll survive," I replied smoothly, if a bit slowly. "Go give those drums hell." "You know it." He let go and headed off to the sound booth. What I wouldn't give to be able to pound the shit out of something just then. Drums, the speed bag, and Kane's home gym, anything to take the edge off. Kane sat on the arm of the long sofa and put one booted foot on the edge of the coffee table. "So this new nurse is pushing her luck on the regular, huh?" "Looks that way." I was so frustrated my jaw ached from gritting my teeth. He nodded. "Well, you know how I'd handle it. I'd be on a plane back to PA just so I could stand toe-to-toe with her while I demand the director send her fucking packing." "Your usual bull in a china shop approach," I scoffed, but I knew the feeling. Or it was before Aubrey, and it's definitely Aubrey's influence that's prompting what I'm about to say next. Oh shit, this ought to be good. I was actually fighting a smile, which was a vast improvement over my mood only a moment ago. Aubrey was Cade's wife, a pseudo-sister to the rest of the band, and the most awesome publicist we'd ever had. She was legitimately the best thing to ever happen to Cade, and we were all grateful as hell to have her around. Cade glared at me for a second for my smart-ass comment, but I was used to his dirty looks. Anyone outside the band would be shitting themselves if he looked at them like that. But we knew him too well to be intimidated. This nurse is fairly new to the facility, right? I nodded. And she's only been working with your dad for a couple of months? Again, I nodded. Okay, here's the thing. Maybe she doesn't get why it's such a big deal. The previous caregivers had at least some idea of who he was, who you are, correct? Yeah, I met her a few times when I visited, and she always did what she was supposed to do. She wasn't a fangirl or anything, more like a 50-year-old no-nonsense caregiver who said she was more of a fan of country music than anything in the rock genre, but she knew who I was. I talked to her a little here and there. She also never missed a check-in, not once, and she was more detailed than this new nurse. It was more than, "the patient is fine," when she emailed. I got paragraphs, not one clipped sentence. I probably should have told Cade all that, but just the thought of saying it all out loud was exhausting. Cade stood and went to refill his cup, adding copious amounts of lemon to his ice water. Maybe you need to better articulate to her what you expect. You can even do it through email. That way she can refer back to it and you don't have to verbally spar with her, since I know that's not your favorite. He retook his spot on the arm of the couch and chugged half the water while I considered what he was saying. Basically, he was suggesting I lay it all out like I was talking to a kindergartner. So that if she missed a check-in again, I could prove to her supervisor that she knew what was expected of her, was reminded in explicit detail, and failed to do it. I'd pretty much done that in the email I sent, but I could see where maybe I needed to expand on a few things, so she knew exactly what type of information I was requesting, not just that I wanted a general check-in. Have it on record in case she blows off her duties again. Smart. Exactly. This gives her a chance to correct the behavior and gives you tangible evidence that you explained to her what was required in the event that she continues to shirk her duties. I gave him a sideways look. Aubrey really has calmed your ass down, hasn't she? I never thought you'd end up being the voice of reason. He shrugged. My first instinct still tends toward bar fight mentality, but she's definitely gotten me to at least take a second to think shit through before I start busting heads. Doesn't mean I won't still bust them if need be, but I take the time to weigh the options now. Whipped, I snorted. Alright, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the chapter reading. Have a good night.